I can feel the warmth of his hand before I see him. That's the first thing. Not his face, not his name, just the heat of a palm I've never touched, pressing into the space between my shoulder blades, guiding me forward like I'm livestock at auction. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's what it felt like. The kitchen smelled like lye soap and overcooked celery. My mother's celery, the kind she grew along the fence where the soil was always too wet. And there were 6 people sitting at the table, and every single one of them already knew what I didn't. That this was decided. I was wearing my blue dress, the one with the crooked hem I'd sewn myself because Mama said a girl who can't sew straight won't keep a straight house. And I remember looking down at that hem and thinking, I should have fixed that. And then thinking, why does that matter right now? And it didn't. But my brain went there because the rest of me... No, wait. Let me back up. I wasn't even supposed to be in that kitchen. I was supposed to be hanging the wash. It was a Thursday. I know it was a Thursday because the bread was baking for Friday prep and the whole house had that yeast smell that got into your hair. And my sister Ruth came out to the line and said, Mama wants you inside. Just like that, flat. She wouldn't look at me. She was folding a pillowcase and her hands were shaking, and Ruth's hands never shook. I was 17. Quick pause. My name is Esther, and this is Unspoken Vows. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, was there ever a moment someone decided your future without asking you? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. You have to understand something about where I grew up. Nobody ever sat you down and said, you will marry who we choose. That's not how it worked. It was quieter than that. It lived in the things that just happened. A girl turned 16 and suddenly her father was visiting another family's farm more often. Suddenly there were conversations that stopped when you walked into the room. Suddenly your mother was teaching you pie crust like your life depended on it. And maybe it did. The rule wasn't written anywhere. It didn't need to be. It was in the air the way humidity is in the air. You couldn't point to it, but it was on your skin all the time. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The fathers didn't think they were doing something cruel. They believed, genuinely, deeply, with everything in them, that they were protecting us. That a girl left to choose for herself would choose wrong, would choose feeling over stability, attraction over character, and that those choices would break her. So they chose for us, out of love. I need you to understand that, because it makes everything that happened next so much worse than if they'd just been cruel. I remember being maybe 14 and watching Sarah Yoder walk to the creek with Eli Graber. They weren't doing anything, just walking. Their shoulders weren't even touching. But that evening at supper, Mama said, not to me, to my father, like I wasn't even there. Rachel Yoder's going to have trouble with that one. And my father nodded. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. But I understood every word that wasn't said. I understood that Sarah had done something dangerous by walking next to a boy she liked. I understood that wanting was dangerous. I understood that if I ever walked to the creek with a boy, I'd be trouble. And I remember pressing my fork into my mashed potatoes, pressing it down hard, making these little lines, and thinking, I will never be trouble. I was 14, and I was already building the cage from the inside. That's the thing nobody tells you. They don't have to lock the door if you learn to sit still on your own. His name was Jonas. Jonas Byler. He was 23. No, 24. I always get that wrong. He had a farm 11 miles east, 40 acres of dairy, and a barn he'd built with his own hands the summer before. I know those details because those were the details that mattered. Not what he looked like, not whether he was kind, not whether he laughed at things I found funny. 40 acres, dairy, sound barn. That was the resume. That was what made him suitable. My father had met his father at a livestock sale in March, and by April, they'd agreed. By April, my life had been decided between two men I wasn't in the room with, over cattle prices and coffee so strong you could smell it on their coats for days. And Jonas, I want to be fair to him. He was tall, quiet. He had these hands that were always moving, always fidgeting with a button or a piece of straw or the brim of his hat. And I think now that he was nervous all the time, but didn't have the language for it. I don't think anyone had asked him what he wanted either. I think he'd been told, the Stoltzfus girl, and he'd nodded, because that's what you did. You nodded. Everybody nodded. Nodding was the whole language. The first time I was alone with Jonas was in our parlor, and my mother was in the next room with the door open exactly 4 inches. I know because I stared at that gap the entire time, measuring it, wondering if 4 inches of open door was enough to save me from whatever was about to happen. Nothing happened. We sat. He asked me if I liked canning. I said yes. He asked me if I was good with animals. I said yes. I said yes to everything because what else was there to say? No wasn't a word I'd been taught. Not for this. And the thing is, I think I could have loved him if we'd met differently. If I'd seen him at a singing and thought, he's kind. If I'd chosen him. But I didn't choose him. He was chosen for me, the way you choose a quilt pattern. This one will do. It's sturdy. It'll last. And I sat in that parlor with my hands folded so tight my knuckles went white. And I smiled, and I said yes. 3 weeks later, we were published. 6 weeks later, I was standing in a room full of 300 people, promising forever to a man I'd had 4 conversations with. 4. I counted. I counted because counting was something I could control. The night after the wedding, we went to his farm. Our farm now, I guess. The bedroom was upstairs, second door on the left, and the floorboards were raw pine that hadn't been sealed yet, so the whole room smelled like sap and sawdust. There was a kerosene lamp on the dresser. The glass was chipped on one side, a little half-moon chip, and the flame flickered through it and made this shadow on the wall that looked like a mouth opening and closing. I remember that shadow. I've never forgotten it. There was a quilt on the bed that his mother had made, double wedding ring pattern, green and cream, and my suitcase was on the floor, and everything I owned in the world was in that suitcase, and it was so small. I stood there looking at it and thinking, that's everything I am, right there, in one bag. Jonas came in behind me. He closed the door, and the sound of that door, it was heavy, oak, and it didn't click shut. It sort of thudded, like a heartbeat stopping. And we both just stood there. He said, is this? And he didn't finish. I said, it's fine. I said it fast, too fast. He was standing by the window, and his reflection was in the glass, and I could see his face without looking at him directly, and he looked, I don't know, lost. He looked like someone who'd been told to do something important and had no idea how to do it. And I think my face looked the same, but I couldn't see my own reflection from where I was standing. My hands were at my sides, his hands were at his sides, and the distance between us was maybe 6 feet, but it felt like 600 miles and 6 inches all at once, and neither of us moved. He took a step, I took a breath. That's all. He took a step, and I took a breath, and something in me... Sorry, give me a second. Something in me understood that the next few minutes were going to change what my body meant to me, and I didn't have a single word for what was about to happen. Nobody had given me words. My mother had said, be a good wife. That was it. 3 words. My entire preparation for the most intimate act of my life was, be a good wife. He was gentle. I want to say that clearly. He was gentle, and he was scared, and he was trying. And I was gentle, and I was scared, and I was trying. And 2 terrified people trying to be gentle with each other in the dark is... I don't even know what to call what that felt like. It wasn't what I'd been afraid of. It wasn't violent. It wasn't cruel. It was just two people who had no idea what they were doing it because they were supposed to, because God said so, because 300 people had watched them promise, because the quilt was on the bed and the lamp was lit, and this was what came next. And I lay there afterward and looked at the ceiling, and there was a knot in one of the pine boards that looked like an eye, and I stared at it. I stared at it for a long time. Jonas was on his side, facing away from me. I think he was awake, but neither of us spoke. I noticed the quilt had a loose thread near my hand. I pulled it. I kept pulling. A whole seam started to give. I stopped, and I thought, that's me. One pulled thread and everything comes apart. Here's what nobody told either of us. Neither of us understood that my body had its own responses, its own timing, its own needs that had nothing to do with obedience. Nobody told me that what I was feeling, or not feeling, was a matter of biology, not faith. Nobody told Jonas that gentleness wasn't the same as knowledge, that trying wasn't the same as understanding. The specific harm was this, and I need to say it plainly. I spent the first 3 years of my marriage believing something was broken inside me. Broken, like a defective tool. And the community had a word for women like that. Women who didn't settle easily into the physical side of marriage. They called them cold. Not to their faces. Behind closed doors, in the low voices, the way you'd talk about a cow that wouldn't take. She's cold. And I heard that word once, applied to someone else, and I carried it like a stone in my chest for years because I thought, that's me. I'm the cold one. And Jonas, he wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what makes it worse. He was doing exactly what he'd been told. He was being a husband. He was providing. He was gentle. And he had no idea, no concept, no framework, no language for the idea that my experience mattered separately from his. Not because he was selfish, because nobody had ever told him it existed. The word consent, I didn't hear that word until I was 31 years old. 31. I'd been married for 14 years. And when I finally heard it, when someone explained what it meant, what it really meant beyond just yes or no, I realized that what I'd been missing wasn't consent exactly. It was the possibility of it. The community had taken the possibility off the table before I was old enough to know the table existed. And that's the grief I carry. Not that Jonas hurt me, but that neither of us ever had the chance to get it right. The pattern was quiet. That's what I want you to understand. It wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no slamming doors, no bruises anyone could see. It was just a life. I woke up, I milked, I cooked, I cleaned. I lay down at night, and I went somewhere else inside my head. This field I'd invented, flat and gold and empty, no fences, no houses, no one. And I stayed there until it was over. And then I came back to the pine ceiling and the knot that looked like an eye, and I thought, okay, another day done. I learned to leave my body the way you learn to leave a room, quickly, quietly, without anyone noticing you've gone. And the strangest part, the part that still gets me, is that I thought that was normal. I thought every woman did this. I thought the field was something God gave us, like a little mercy, a place to go when your body was being borrowed. I even thanked him for it once. I got on my knees by the bed, and I thanked God for giving me a field to disappear into. And honestly, I don't know whether to laugh or cry at that. Maybe both. I think both is right. It was at a quilting circle that I first understood I wasn't alone. Rachel, Not Sarah Yoder's mother, a different Rachel, Rachel King. We were stitching a log cabin pattern in her kitchen, and her kitchen had this wood stove that made a ticking sound when it cooled down. Tick, 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 like a clock that was running out. And someone, I think it was Hannah Lapp, said something about being tired. Just, I'm so tired. Nothing special, but the way she said it. The way her needle stopped moving for one beat. And Rachel looked at her, and Rachel looked at me. And nobody said a single word, but every woman in that room knew exactly what kind of tired Hannah meant. And it wasn't the kind that sleep fixes. I opened my mouth. I was going to say, I don't know what I was going to say. Me too, maybe? Something small. But then Mary Zook started talking about her tomato plants, and the moment closed like a hand closing, and we all went back to stitching, and I went back to my field. Hannah came to me 3 weeks later. She was carrying a jar of pickled beets. That was always the excuse, bringing food. Nobody questions a woman carrying food. And she stood in my kitchen and she said, "Some nights I count the boards in the ceiling." 7 words. And I said, "I count the knots." And that was everything. That was the most intimate conversation I'd ever had. 2 sentences. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. She put the beets on the counter and she left, and I stood there with my hand on that jar for 10 minutes, just feeling the cool glass, and I thought, there are 2 of us. And then I thought, no, there are all of us. Every woman in that circle. Every woman with a field, a ceiling, a counting ritual. 4 months later, Hannah had her 5th baby, and I didn't see her for a long time. And when I did, something behind her eyes had gone out, like a lamp turned down to nothing. And I never asked her about the ceiling boards again. And she never brought me beets again. And that silence, that's how it protected itself. The system didn't need guards. It had exhaustion. It had babies. It had beets. I was 31 when the word found me. I wasn't looking for it. I was in a doctor's office, English doctor outside the community, because I'd been having headaches so bad I saw white spots, and in the waiting room there was a magazine, one of those women's magazines with a shiny cover, and I picked it up because the headaches made me desperate for distraction, and there was an article. I don't remember the title, but there was a diagram, a medical diagram of a woman's body, labeled with arrows and words I had never seen before in my life. And I sat in that plastic chair, the orange plastic, the kind that sticks to your legs in summer, and I read the word arousal, and I didn't know what it meant. I read it again. I read the paragraph around it, and the paragraph said, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact words. It said that a woman's body has its own physical response cycle, independent, involuntary, and that without understanding this cycle, physical intimacy can cause pain, shutdown, emotional withdrawal. And I read that sentence and the magazine got blurry and I realized I was crying. Right there in the waiting room, in front of strangers. Because that sentence, that one paragraph in a magazine I picked up because my head hurt, had just explained 14 years of my life in words I'd never been allowed to learn. I didn't feel angry. I know you'd think I'd feel angry, but I didn't. I felt like someone had told me the name of an illness I'd always had. Like I'd been walking on a broken foot my whole life and someone finally said, "Your foot is broken." And the relief and the grief hit at exactly the same moment. The relief of knowing. The grief of all the years I didn't. And I thought about that 17-year-old girl, not me. I couldn't think of her as me. That girl standing in the kitchen with the lye soap and the crooked hem. And I wanted to reach back through time and put my hands on her face and say, "You're not cold. You're not broken. They just never taught you the language for your own body." But I couldn't reach her. She was gone. She'd been gone for a long time. And Jonas? Jonas didn't know either. That's the thing nobody tells you. He was just as cheated. He spent 14 years thinking he was failing at something nobody had taught him how to do. And he carried that too, in his own way, in the quiet, in the space between us in bed that got wider every year until it felt like we were sleeping on separate continents. And I grieved for him too. I grieved for both of us. Two people who could have been good together if anyone had ever given us the words. The grief, the specific grief, the one that still wakes me up sometimes at 3 in the morning, isn't about what happened. It's about what could have been different. It's about the possibility that was stolen. I tried to explain it once to a friend, an English friend, someone I met after I started going to the headache doctor regularly, and I said, they didn't just keep information from me, they kept me from me. And she nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? She grew up with books and health class and mothers who used real words for real body parts. And she couldn't imagine, she couldn't fathom what it's like to be a grown woman learning the names for your own anatomy from a waiting room magazine. That loneliness, the loneliness of being between two worlds, where one hurt you and the other can't comprehend how, that's its own kind of exile. And I carried that. But here's what I need to say, and I need to say it carefully, because this is the part people get wrong. That community gave me things, real things I carry in my body, not just my memory. The sound of 16 horses pulling buggies down a gravel road on a Sunday morning, all at once, all that clopping and creaking, and the dust rising gold in the early light. That sound is inside me like a second heartbeat. The bread, oh, the bread. My mother's bread from the wood oven, the crust so dark it was almost black, and the inside so soft it steamed when you pulled it apart. And you ate it with butter she'd churned that morning, and apple butter so thick the spoon stood up in the jar. I have never, not once, in all the years since, tasted bread like that. And my grandmother's hands, her hands when she prayed, rough, cracked, flour in the creases, and they moved when she prayed like she was shaping the words out of something physical, like prayer was bread too, and she was kneading it. I carry those hands. They're in my dreams. They're in the way I fold my own hands now without thinking. Those gifts are real. They aren't canceled by the harm. And the harm isn't softened by the gifts. They just live together, in the same house, in the same me. I am homesick for a place that hurt me, and I have stopped apologizing for that contradiction. The harm was silence dressed as love. 5 words. That's all it was. They loved us. I believe that. And the way they loved us was by keeping us silent and small and ignorant and calling it protection. And I can hold both of those truths in my hands now without dropping either one. I'm building something now, slowly, messily, with a lot of wrong turns. A life where I get to choose. Not perfectly, not without fear, but choose. And some days I miss the simplicity of not choosing, of having the road laid out, of knowing exactly what Tuesday would look like because every Tuesday looked the same. And some days the freedom is so big it terrifies me. But I wouldn't go back. I'd never go back. Even though part of me, a small, flour-dusted horse and gravel part of me, will always live there. And I have made my peace with her. She can stay. If you grew up somewhere your body was kept from you like something dangerous, I see you. If you spent years believing you were broken because nobody gave you the language to understand yourself, I see you. If you loved the place that hurt you and felt guilty for the loving and guilty for the leaving and guilty for the staying, I see you. You're not broken. You survived something that was designed to be invisible. And surviving invisible things is the hardest kind of surviving, because nobody hands you a medal for it. Nobody even knows you're doing it. If you're still inside, I see you. If you just left, I see you. If you left 20 years ago and it still hits you in the grocery store when you smell fresh bread, I see you. If you're lying next to someone right now, wondering if this is all there is, I see you. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. Tell me the moment it hit you. I want to know. Because every time you share, someone else reads it and realizes they're not the only one. And that matters more than you know. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, but I'm getting closer. This is Unspoken Vows. And if you want to hear what comes next, subscribe, stay. And to the members and Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. Your body was always yours. It's time to learn it.